We're solving one of the biggest problems that knowledge workers face nowadays, which is information overload.
I don't know why anyone cares about custom branded charts.
It's a different way of thinking than a lot of engineers typically use.
Why is that hard?
About 15 to 20% of the population is neurodivergent.
I love it so much. I've got a million really in-depth questions that we're not going to ask the other founders. These are all amazing questions to get because it means you're onto something and it means you've provoked interest.
What's your name?
Nice to meet you. Nathan. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
You have a
CTO,
minute to
co-founder
pitch.
of Wobby. Yeah.
Awesome. You have a minute to pitch. Tell us what you're building. Are you ready?
I'm very ready.
What are you building?
So at Wobby, we're solving one of the biggest problems that knowledge workers face nowadays, which is information overload. So knowledge workers, especially those that do a lot of research, like market researchers, analysts, even journalists, they all really struggle to find the information they need to make sense of what they find and to communicate their findings effectively and at scale. Wobby speeds up that whole process up to 4 times. With Wobby, our AI information platform, they can gather, interpret, and analyze data, and then quickly turn that into useful reports, presentations, and even articles. What really sets us apart from all these other generic AI tools is the fact that Wobby really understands the context of these professionals. It can handle complex data, and we also have all kinds of agentic AI workflows that support scaling up their whole insight generation and report generation. We already have quite some big customers in Europe. We have some traction in the US, so we're very eager to start exploring how we could expand into the US.
All right, that's a minute. You need the mic.
Yeah.
That was pretty
Thanks.
good, though. It was almost like a textbook pitch. I feel like you said all of the
I tried my best.
very good things where you told me, you kind of set up the problem, and then you told me what it was, and then you told me why it was better than the other things I might have said. Well, aren't there things that, can I use ChatGPT to do this or something like that? So you answered a lot of my questions before I ever got to formulate them, which I really appreciate.
That's nice.
I agree. And the only thing I'm left behind with is the thing you couldn't have done in the pitch, and you might not even be able to do it in the conversation. You can only do this through winning. But I'm going to ask you about it anyway because I want to hear about your strategy for winning, which is, it feels like, although Marty's right, you described why it's different, how it's different today, who it serves today, why it serves them today. I still wonder whether you were easily cannibalized or commoditized, right? And so competitors coming out and basically eating your lunch, or the foundational models get so good at what they do and are, recursively able to generate applications or app layers that are as good at some of these things. So talk about that maybe mid to longer term edge where you aren't immediately either cannibalized by some of these companies and the way that AI can be, again, recursively cannibalistic, and or the fact that some of this stuff feels like it might not be that moat heavy.
Well, just real quick, sorry, on that, because I think this will be helpful to all founders, especially in early stage, because the most frustrating thing you'll hear is someone will say, oh, it's too early. It's like, you invest in early stage. How can anything be too early? But there's certain categories and certain products where your questions are sound and you would want answers to them. And because the questions exist for what you're building and they didn't exist for the previous founder or the one before that, you have to prove things that other founders don't have to prove. And so you might have to show me that you have 4 or 5 design partners and they're using it and they're, and they've already shown the 4x traction that you said that they would see. Whereas another founder, they don't have to have any customers or any users. They just have a prototype that no one's used yet. And it's that's not fair. But you're building in a certain category where that question exists, and that's a fair question.
It is.
And so you gotta show. I mean, it's unfortunate because that means you need to be further along.
Yeah.
You need a prototype, you need some users using it, and then you need some data coming back at us.
I mean, it's a question that keeps us awake every night. First of all, we already have customers using it. And I think one of the most important things that we're doing is really just understanding their problem and understanding our ICP and what their process looks like. And using that, we can kind of make this big moat with other tools out there, a Copilot or a Perplexity even, because these tools are not made for these knowledge workers, their specific process. So Wobby is much different in that aspect, where it's really made for their process. It's made to solve their specific pain points. So it's really about focusing on these ICPs.
But tell me more, because anyone can say that thing you just said of, okay, there's a more specific pathway that these companies will never serve, right? And we're going to serve it because we recognize and understand this customer, and we believe there's a monetary gain to be had by serving them very well. However, you haven't, maybe this is like the question, you haven't convinced me that that's defensible. So, and I think the way to do that is to tell me very specifically and convincingly about how unique their approach is. So talk about, kind of maybe get very specific as to why they do need something that isn't Perplexity or ChatGPT.
Yeah. So I think what's really kind of sets us apart there is the fact that we're an all-in-one platform. So it's about for example, the first aspect is gathering data. So we have both public data available on Wobby, and you can also connect your own data. So that's a first thing that many of our customers just don't have with these other tools. The second thing is analyzing and interpreting the data. There we have very specific features for these kind of knowledge.
Example?
One example is for example, you can create charts in your own branding. You can quickly create all kinds of...
How many customers did you say you had?
Right now, 12.
Are they nameable? Is one of them nameable, recognizable? Is it worth naming?
One of them, for example, is a major news organization in Belgium.
So now let's get, because what I'm looking for, what you're saying still isn't specific enough. Let me say why. When you say, for example, they need to analyze data and create charts, like, okay, I think an AI tool that can eventually create charts will create charts as good as you can create charts. But you might mean something different there. So a major publication, what's the need in charting right now that they can't solve by getting Perplexity to spit out a table?
I think the main need is the kind of automation that you have there. So for example, now with the elections that we had, right? So all these like Financial Times, The Economist, they have all the election data. And then with Wobby, they can combine public data from Wobby there. So demographics and so on. And then they can, for each city or for each state in the US, they can just like spit out charts with text and in different languages for different tone of voices. So scaling up that process, that's what Wobby focuses on. And that's something that other AI tools can't.
Differentiate with the Perplexity example. Why would I not be able to just paste a bunch of files into Perplexity?
Yeah, but you can really create charts in your own branding or scale that up to multiple
this is
tone of voices.
maybe where to begin to get specific. So now, because what you might say is, and this is where, the phrase is going to be the application layer, right? You make it very specific as to the application layer and how much of this is actually not an AI advantage. And that doesn't mean you can't say, here's a bunch of AI backend that we're stringing together to get a great output. But as important, more important, slightly less important, depending on the startup, is the application layer is custom made for workflows that require custom branding and graphics because these are major publications that have to look a certain way, or maybe it has to do with the sourcing and verifying of information that needs to be, Perplexity and ChatGPT will try to cite things, but maybe it needs to be specific in a certain way for a publication. But getting that particular, I think, is essential, even in the minute, right? You don't need to do all of the examples in a minute, but giving one example of, or maybe 3 examples of the use case is so specific that our application layer being that much better will matter. Because it's not always true that the application layer being that integrated or custom will matter. And that's the thing you actually have to convince me on is, okay, I do believe, let me give an example where it does clearly matter. If someone is building for science and research in medicine, I would believe that an application layer that is very careful to give scientists only validated information by their lab, or cross-verifies certain types of patient data, or is very careful in cleaning inputs and outputs of personally identifiable information. Great, okay, that's specific enough and mobile enough. It needs to kind of be like that.
Yeah,
there's an interesting pattern with this episode of Feedback Loop. Where every founder so far has said something that you and I might suggest they shouldn't have said, because it sent us down a path. And so when you started your pitch, I wanted to listen for more things that would get me excited. And then you said one very particular thing where, candidly, like, I was like, I'm out, like, I'm done. And that's unfortunate. But it's when you kept focusing on the fact that they can do custom branding on their charts. And I was just thinking, like, why is that so important to you? Like, that doesn't seem like it's that important. It doesn't seem like I need a powerful AI engine to do custom branding on a chart. And the fact that you keep saying it makes me think that if that's the coolest, best thing you've got, that this thing, it's probably not true, but that's just the interpretation I had, is that this thing's not that great and not that powerful. If the real value prop you're bringing to somebody is like, hey, I do custom branding, I can do your colors and your logo. It's just like, I don't know if I need an AI engine to do that, or whatever it is you're pitching. So it's just like, oh, this thing isn't what I thought it was. I thought it was going to be something really powerful, and now I feel like it's something rudimentary, but only because you said that one particular. Now I can't unhear it. But that's just again,
it's such an essential piece of advice, by the way. And we also, as free agency, we give it to job seekers. People fall into this trap. And by the way, this is recoverable both literally and figuratively. And it's because when you're mentioning that thing, you're thinking it's validating a story that has been already to the other person proven to be true or won over. And what's happening is it hasn't proven to be true or won over quite to the intensity that you think. So it feels like a safe thing to say because you're like, look, I'm just mentioning yet another feature. But you're not realizing we're still kind of in the, a lot of things need to be true for this to be investable in, kind of a venture backable way versus another product that might make the person lifestyle money if he has 2,000 subscribers, but it's not going to make venture scale money, right? And so think about that as, why can a phrase be so dangerous? It's because something hasn't yet happened here that has happened for you to say, it's not a problem if this is one of those features. But it is in the context of this conversation.
I just think if you held true to your original stat of, you do X for knowledge workers, and then the end result is a 4X sort of improvement. I don't know why anyone cares about custom branded charts. It's nice, but irrelevant, right? If you just look me straight in the face, I will never give you custom branded charts. I don't care. You're giving me 4X, and so it's like that. The fact that that came up made me think that the other thing must not be as valuable as I thought it would be. And then not to bring the other pitch into this pitch, but it's why did the security conversation come up? Now I'm worried that people are worried about security. Now, are they not going to use these apps? But something was said. And so in this one, it's why is that? Why was that? And you're like, Marty, why are you harping on it so much? Right? I get it.
No, I think you should focus more on the compounding effect of all the things I said. So the fact that it's all in one, the fact that it helps you scale up your insight generation,
really
the fact that it's custom.
For someone to understand when they're not building it with you.
Yeah.
Because compounding effects can feel fragile, right? Because so many things have to be true for it to compound in the way that you need it to. And you might feel they are. And then you're forcing me to make that bet. But I don't have as much evidence as you do that that's a good series of bets to make. Now, you might go, okay, but that's my advantage. So how do I then sell it if it's not something I should say to a stranger? The way you would sell it, and I think this is probably where you're going to wind up going when you go into investor meetings, is there's a before here that is probably very convincing about there being a custom after. As in, maybe my earlier advice saying, hey, this sounds too much like someone's going to eat it. It's true, but maybe the more important thing you'd say to that advice is no, you don't understand how bad it is for these people right now. And so an all-in-one that does a bunch of these small compounding things is actually really compelling for them. And so there you'd have to, oh my God, I can't believe I'm gonna do it again. I don't usually recommend hero stories. I don't like the Jane struggles to take notes in class, therefore my app is gonna help Jane. But maybe you need a Jane and you say, okay, the way that someone at a newspaper does this sort of research and does this and this, let me describe to you how awful it is, how many systems they have to work with, how many of those systems block them out, how they're restricted from using AI in certain use cases. Imagine if all of that looked different. And that is made up of a bunch of parts, but you've convinced me now that that's so compelling because that person is experiencing a unique amount of pain such that actually this is worth the custom application that might not itself seem so broad for everybody in the world to use, but for that person, no, they want it every single day.
I want to say one of the things I really did like about I thought that first minute was awesome. But you said something in there where you didn't skirt away from the fact that they're not using AI today. I think you went right into it. You said, yeah, they're using those tools he's talking about, and it's not effective. And that's a problem.
Exactly.
So I love that you jumped into that right away. Yeah. I think you want a little bit more, and again, maybe we couldn't do it in a minute, but some more depth in there. But I do like that you took it head on and you didn't try to pretend like they're not already using Perplexity.
No, they are. And they even did benchmarks with Wobby, and that's why they're still customers of Wobby.
That's, by the way, a fun fact to bring up. For the sake of time, we're going to have to move.
Thanks.
But the benchmark.
And good job on the shirt as well, by the way, branding.
Yeah.
Hey, are you watching on YouTube? Because if you're watching on YouTube, I have to tell you, there's a subscribe button here, or maybe it's under Marty somewhere, and we would love your support. We are doing this thing to support an ecosystem of founders, whether you're watching, right now you're watching the feedback loop, but we've got 3 course founders where I interviewed Marty about what he's building with Agree and his past as an investor and founder. We've got the Sherveen show, awkwardly named after me, where I interview founders on the early stage moment, and then this early stage moment too. And so your support, subscribing, sharing it with a startup nerd friend means a whole lot. We want to bring more founders, not only to the stage in New York, but to watching all the insights and the lessons that hopefully help them change the world. So if you're watching, if you're on YouTube, press subscribe, like, what other buttons exist? Turn on your notifications. That's all I know. All right, on with the show. Shall we go on to the next founder, Marty? Awesome. Round of applause. What's your name?
My name's Tom.
Tom, are you ready to give your minute pitch, get some feedback?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Awesome. You're ready. What are you building?
Okay, I'm Tom. I'm the founder of Ocuroot, and I'm building a CI/CD platform to help B2B enterprises manage their production deployments. So over the last 5 years, I was running the engineering productivity group at a company called Yext, and I found that as the company was growing, we were adding more and more production environments, like a dedicated environment in the EU for our European customers for GDPR and data sovereignty. And with those additional environments came complexity that made it very difficult for us to see what had been deployed where using our traditional deployment pipelines. And that made it hard to get code out of the door and really difficult to do things like incident response and disaster recovery. So with Ocuroot, I'm building a new model that is based on state and the relationship between changes, builds, and deployments so that teams don't have to worry so much about the shape of their pipelines and can spend more time working on getting code out. Working on a prototype right now that I'll be releasing to some early users in the next few weeks, and I'll be getting feedback and iterating from there.
A minute on the top. Good job. Before we get into this, I really like this pitch, but I'm going to guess 99% of this room has no idea what you just said. So who understands what CI/CD is at all? Understands? Really? Wow. Okay, more technical audience than usual. Who understands what the word environment means every time you said environment? Still more than what the hell? Okay, we have a more technical audience. Who's an engineer?
Oh,
whoa.
yeah.
This might be our more technical audience ever. Like, I swear to you, prior episodes, I would have expected one hand maybe. Okay, I'm now talking apparently to YouTube mostly. And I think there's a way for you to use analogy to describe for people, even people who work at technical companies sometimes don't understand, why this is a problem. And I think, and it can still be done in that minute because you did a lot of other really great things. For someone who does understand it, I was able to quickly imagine, especially in the context of like region is a super helpful, I think, problem for you to identify because that's when it gets really hairy. But scaling teams, it also gets really hairy. But I think the analogy or the crafting of some version of the world where a non-technical person can understand why this matters is really important. So I haven't yet thought, because I thought we were going to have a different conversation as to what the analogy could be for you. But yeah, that I just want to give you that feedback and we'll work on it here. But I think there's a 10-second version, let's say in the context of a minute pitch, of you educating anybody on the other side as to what you mean. And then you're going to talk about your problem, which you did really elegantly. The other thing that I want to get to, I don't think, is that you did that well, is I don't know why your solution will work, right? It sounded thoughtful in the sense of like, you're going to help teams not think about their pipelines as much as they need to, but I don't know how. And that's the other thing I wanted to get to.
So that's a good segue because this is another one where great pitch. It's like, if there was a playbook for getting it in a minute, you nailed it. You did a great job. If I'm providing creative feedback, the one thing I would think that you have the opportunity to do is leave, use this 1 minute to buy yourself more time, right? And so I would have left that last 4 seconds with a statement that provokes us to be like, okay, tell me more about that. Like something like, in the CFO is gonna love it because it reduces X by 14%. It's like, okay, tell me more about that one, right? So you only got a minute, but you've provoked us, and now you've just bought yourself 4 more minutes because we have to know the answer to this question. Just because I do think you covered so many of your bases, you left an opportunity, I think, just to hook me in. Because I do want to know, because I think the space you're working in and what you're building, the thing I kept getting back is I kind of want to know how this affects the P&L. That's now I kind of, because I'm trying to think who's the buyer of this? I don't think it's the Eng team. I think it's going to be someone in the C-suite, and it's going to be a CTO, and the CTO is going to be coming back to the board. They're going to be like, hey, we need this solution. Because,
in fact, they're probably going to cite the growth of engineering resources.
But you're not going to get to all that in even a minute, right? So you're not going to get into the last 4 seconds. But I want to, and I don't know the answer to this.
It's a teaser.
How could you tease me to get me to ask you how this impacts the P&L and what because now I love it so much. I've got a million really in-depth questions that we're not going to ask the other founders. What's the sales cycle and who are you selling into, and why would people say no, and what are the alternatives? But these are all amazing questions to get because it means you're onto something and it means you've provoked interest.
Cool. Thanks.
Let's get to maybe the analogy by way of the how. So, one of the things, and for people who are less technical in the audience, when you think about what he's talking about for deployment and testing and regions and kind of the engineering resources required, the thing to think about is I'm going to use a restaurant as an example here. When a restaurant is larger, literally physically serving more customers, you don't just need like one more chef. You're also going to need what are the people called who like go between the kitchen and like the front of house when it's a big restaurant? Runners. You need more runners. You need obviously some amount of hosts. You need waiters. You need cleaning staff. You need your kitchen to be laid out in a certain way to funnel all of that correctly. The sound design becomes important. And some of these are this problem. Some of these are adjacent problems. But the point is, that's the analogy maybe I'd use is like set up a restaurant and the physicality of a restaurant to describe, to a non-technical audience. Okay, let me describe to you what. And this is a shorter version of that, obviously. But anyway, like now talk about the how.
Yeah, so the way that I'm approaching this is to look at some things that have really annoyed me over the past few years. One of those is YAML. And I've said that to a bunch of engineers who've all gone, oh God, I hate YAML as well. So I'm working with
Why do you hate YAML?
There's two reasons. One of which it can be a little bit difficult to come back to and change things. And another one is that a lot of companies, particularly in this space, try to create a DSL on top of it. So they're like shoehorning in ways of doing like an if statement or a for loop into YAML. So you have this steep learning curve that goes with that.
Because to come back and make a change requires it to be well documented?
Yeah. So people aren't able to...
You don't hate YAML literally. You hate instead a custom version of deployment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So like you end up with engineers who have to learn all these additional things on top of YAML to be able to work with it in this particular context when they're already familiar with writing code. And they can write imperative code, they can write loops, they can write if statements. So I'm working with a language called Starlark, which came out of Google, and that allows us to have a configuration language that's a bit closer to the kind of languages that engineers are going to be using day to day.
And that's the main innovation?
It's not the main one. No.
What else?
So along with it is the state model that I alluded to before. So typically with pipelines, you're building a graph or a DAG. So you're saying this happens, then this happens. Maybe it branches out. What I want to do is to provide engineers with a way of saying, these are the rules for deploying into these environments. So if you add a new environment,
so like I understand the end result of this problem is when you talk about rules and deployment, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm like a more technically oriented product person, so that's my context for you. I'm not an engineer. When you talk about a state model in this case, are state models complicated because, like, how different? Like, why is that hard to wrap your head around when you're changing something or trying to do something new?
Yeah, so it's the so the state model is what I'm doing, but it's the DAG and the graph that's difficult for a lot of engineers. So that's hard because it's a different way of thinking than a lot of engineers typically use. So they have to like figure out what the best way is to apply this concept to what they do every day.
Well, say more about why. I'm trying to get to like the pain net of, don't describe the pain as they find it painful. Describe, here's what's going on.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, as a concrete example from my experience, we'd have a pipeline that was designed to go to like one production environment. If we have to add another, we've then got to redesign that pipeline. And we have to make sure that it's doing the right tests.
But how are you solving that, I guess?
So you would define your environments with a set of, the rules, but also attributes with them. So if you want to add a new environment, you just say, here is a new environment. It has these attributes and the rules figure out what to do.
Okay, maybe this is where like being more technically oriented, but not having put my hands into this is making me confused. Why is that not easy? Like if I'm talking about like you duplicating an environment, is it not doable today inside whatever I'm trying to deploy?
It's easy to a point. My experience has been that once you reach a certain level of complexity, adding to that complexity
what's the complexity
more
that
difficult.
like starts to break it being simple? Like give me an example. Yeah.
So in my previous job, we were deploying to a data center for our main production environment, but Google Cloud for the EU. And we had different tests that had to be run for each of those.
Got it. Okay. But then how are you solving that still is my question.
Yeah. So you would have annotations that are put onto the builds to say, hey, this passed the tests in GCP, this passed the test for the data center, it's safe to deploy to this production environment. And if it's not safe in the other one, it can wait.
This is now a question coming out of naivety, but again, you're going to have to educate most investors about this.
Yeah.
Why is that not already happening inside the existing tools?
So,
like, all the rule sets you're describing make sense to me, right? So, okay, if I've got to serve customers in Europe and we've got regulations we've got to pass through, or maybe it's even compute requirements because we don't have what we need in the EU, or maybe we just launched in South America, or whatever it might be. Custom rule sets and defining those rule sets in a way that are human readable or engineer friendly makes total sense to me, except it doesn't sound complicated. As in, like, I go, okay, well, then why do you need to exist? And maybe let me posit this. Like, when you described it in the minute pitch, I go, I agree on the problem, but we didn't have the how. So now the how feels very simple.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you want to complicate it for me? Like, how am I missing something?
Yeah, sure. So I think the challenge that I've seen is not necessarily whether these things can be achieved. It's how difficult it is to change them once you've got them in place. And I believe that the model that I'm working on is going to make it easier to make changes as companies grow so they can scale into these sorts of things. And so, you'll have a point solution, and we had a solution we were very happy with, but as soon as we added these additional complexities, it all fell apart and we didn't know how to go about changing it because we had like 2,000 different services to worry about across 20 environments. And all of a sudden we're putting all these new rules in and we had to change every single one.
Maybe the best way for me to reconcile some of the confusion in my head is, what does your product look like?
What I'm working on right now is it's sort of in a code repo. People are working with, so like a Git repo, and they will write these configuration files in different directories that we'll call packages. And those packages will have a build function, a deployment function, and the policy function, which defines all the rules. And then when it comes time to do a deploy, which can happen with existing tools like GitHub or Jenkins or what have you, that will talk back to the Ocuroot server. And it will track what builds have happened, what's been deployed where and when, and it will update the internal intent to say, okay, now that all this has happened, I can now deploy to this additional place.
What's not true about what you just said in the current state?
So one advantage is that it's a bit easier to work with monorepos in this model because a lot of places will do it from the top of the tree. And again, coming back to the configuration language versus YAML, there's an advantage there.
Hold on, let me pause you. It's not a big enough answer to the question.
Okay. Could I try again?
Yeah.
Okay, so thinking of a tool like Argo CD. Now that's doing a lot of similar things to what I'm proposing doing by watching for, changes to a repo and like, hey, I want it to be this way. What I'm trying to do is to take that principle and take that further back right to the build, right through the tests. So you've got a complete record of everything that's happened.
It's funny, one of the reasons, again, that I guess I'm struggling, and maybe, by the way, the engineers in the audience aren't struggling as much, even when I've recently, I decided to reteach myself Python and spin up some stuff for internal tooling for agency where I had to go through deploy processes that were annoying, where I felt like I was dealing with a lot of this from a I've got rules that I don't understand that I'm copy pasting out of different tutorials, and I'm going, great, like I've got to make sure this deploys correctly, and here's what Azure require, here's what would have required on Heroku, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And so it feels like it exists, and so maybe that's like my struggle as a non-engineer. I go like, okay, this is already hard and complicated, but it seems like it's being solved by all the things that are complicating my life when I try to deploy anything as like a solo person trying to deploy anything. So why at scale is something that sits, it's a server, it's a server watching for changes makes sense to me, but everything else feels like it exists.
Mm-hmm. To a large extent, a lot of it does in different places.
Okay.
And another aspect of what I want to do is to bring a lot more of that into one place, so it's easier for people to work with and easier to understand.
For the sake of time, we're going to have to pause here. I think this, though, is going to be your challenge, is to take people who are less in the weeds on your problem and convince them that the version of or the problem, I think, is well-defined or feels touchable and real. It's that the how is big enough, and it might be that in the weeds of technical knowledge, your how is not sounding resonant, right? I'm not resonating with your how in a way that goes, yeah, that feels obviously better to me. And that's the thing that I think you need to solve. I've been asking him so many questions.
No, this is good.
I
Maybe just piggyback on that. Maybe what I'll say is there's versions of this pitch that you'll have, right? One to a more engineering centered audience, and then one that will be less technically savvy. I think to that one, to my earlier point, just get me to the bottom line. I'd want to hear more about like the P&L, like why will this save money? And I think like to the earlier points, just a quick little here's the current landscape, here's why it's broken, and then here's how I fix it, and just make it as clear and concise as possible. But I personally would, if you just bring me back to the unit economics of like, if we're gonna do things faster and we're gonna make more money or save more money, like I'm in, man.
And a more technical person will buy it, and then by the way, the non-technical investors will have someone on the team, or they'll call up a founder of theirs to validate it that way too. So bring them. It's the earlier advice you gave when we were talking about another pitch of make it so that the person you're talking to, if they might not get 100% of it, they're going to be able to market your pitch in some version of itself to someone they know, and that might either convince them or that person that it's worth getting to know you more. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Again, I think from the technical perspective, the hard thing, I feel like for him is bringing the how to bear, which is maybe as, I don't remember his exact role before starting this company, but like as an engineering leader, he has felt this so viscerally that he feels his solution is worth some amount of money, attention, etc. But again, I think I got excited about knowing the problem exists, knowing how much money is spent on it, knowing how much engineering time is spent on it, but not understanding that the after is that interesting. And he might be right that it is, but that's the hard part I couldn't get. And that might be the most important part for the pitch to solve. Yeah. Nice founder up.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. What's your name?
Jessica.
Say it right into the mic.
Oh, I'm Jessica. Nice to meet you
We
all.
can still do a handshake. I don't want to leave you hanging.
Oh.
Jessica, you have a minute to pitch and get some feedback. Are you ready?
Yes.
Awesome. What are you building?
Yes. So I'm building a all-in-one platform to support the neurodivergent community and for them to have access to sensory sensitive products as well as nervous system regulating home and lifestyle tools. Our platform also has access to an AI integrated avatar companion, and so the user can be able to access this avatar, and the avatar will be trained to provide different neurological feedback tools such as cognitive behavioral therapy, EFT tapping, and they'll have the verbal and visual modules to assist them. After a decade of working as a school psychologist across the country, I found that the neurodivergent community was growing so rapidly, and there weren't the tools and resources for teachers and parents of these neurologically unique children and students, as well as young adults who are getting out of the educational system, and a lot of young adults getting diagnosed in early adulthood. And for them to be able to have this avatar companion.
That's a minute, so we're going to give you a round of applause.
Thank you so much.
You want to finish that thought?
Yes, and for them to be able to have this avatar companion that's able to provide them with feedback and tools that they might not have learned. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Hey, keep that mic. Thoughts?
Yeah. So I would need to know how big this is. Like, it's hard in a minute, but I'd want to see and I hate this for early stage companies, but like the market, how big the TAM, right? Like I don't know how fast growing it is, and how prevalent it is, and what the percent growth is, year over year in children, and what we should be preparing for. And so I'm trying to wonder, like, is this $1 billion company, or is this like a really good small business that maybe makes $10 million a year?
Yeah. Do you want to tell us about the market a little bit?
Definitely. So I'd say it's it is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and just from a perspective of an educator and a clinician, the population of students being diagnosed with autism is growing at a rapid rate. About 15 to 20% of the population is neurodivergent. And so the rate at which the tools and resources that are being provided for them, especially from a perspective of understanding of how these different minds work and how they're best supported, it's not matching. And so although neurodivergent can be such a broad range, whether that's autism, ADHD, dyslexia, different ways of processing and sensory overstimulation, and people, I think everybody in this room can relate in one way or another, whether it's somebody that they know in their life that has been diagnosed with this or somebody that they've worked with, and to know that there's a need to really support this community. And so the rate at which this is growing is rapid. And
two things. It's going to be a piece of feedback that leads into a question. But I'm going to start with a question. You said 15 to 20% of the population is?
Yes.
Is that an accepted figure?
Yes.
How much of that is ADHD? Do you know?
That I wouldn't know.
Is it a lot of ADHD?
Yes, it's a very common diagnosis.
Well, so let me go to where I'm going to. That stat, even if it's true now that you've told me that it's true and I believe you, it's like one of those things we've been mentioning to other founders. It feels like something I want to fight with. Why do I want to fight with it? Well, you said 15, 20%. I go, wow, doesn't that by its nature make it not divergent? It's just, one of who we are.
Definitely.
And so it feels like such a big number. Now, it still might be true. And you were answering a specific question. So like, to be fair, he asked you gave a number. But I might come up with a different number because it feels like one I want to fight with. Mm-hmm. And that has to do with like what's in my head about how many people have truly neurodivergent diagnoses versus are being diagnosed. Obviously, we've had like the ADHD pill mills that might be like driving up false diagnosis, right? Which isn't to say there isn't a real population for you to serve.
I see. Yes.
But this is a fight that you don't want to have in an investor meeting because I still accept this. I didn't, I in my head go, this is a huge problem by default. So finding a way to frame the number in a way that doesn't bring up, let's call it cultural issues, can be useful. So let's talk about that for a second though. So like when you're targeting folks, are you, because you mentioned autism a few times and then you've expanded the definition here. Do you see a certain audience as being way more underserved? And I say not just underserved as in the beginning of being served, but also that there's a lot to gain by them being served, as in the marginal utility for them receiving something. Like we might say, for example, 15 to 20% of people are neurodivergent. By the way, only 10% of those people need this sort of attention or might benefit more greatly from this sort of attention. What are we talking about here as far as who you think is in your addressable and immediate market?
The community that I'd say I'm more focused on is the community that's been diagnosed with autism or parents and teachers who are supporting that community.
Say more, why? I mean, that sounds reasonable to me, but like what's the justification for focusing there first?
The rate at which this community is growing, as well as the fact that they're the community that has the most sensory overstimulation tendencies, and they're a community where in young adulthood, they would need the most support.
I think that second part is like the biggest one for me, right? Because it feels, very true and visceral again as to like the marginal utility of the product, right? Because when you talk about other versions of being neurodivergent, then I go, okay, how much of that is addressable through something like your solution versus being medicated or getting more intensive care or treatment or attention? When you talk about like that sensory portion and also giving people the tools, especially for the late night diagnosis, you mentioned that earlier, all of that feels very touch and feel solution oriented. So like really emphasizing the why, not to like, not for the sake of nothing, but just find the why to say that's what makes it so addressable.
Thank you.
So the main things that I were latching on to is you kept coming back to this AI avatar, and I'm wondering is like how important is that? Is that the product or is that a complement to the product? That was one thing. I'll ask the other two. So I was just like, because we talked about this before, some of the other pitches, or now I'm just latching on to it. I can't unhear it. And it's like, okay, how important is the AI avatar? And then you'd said one thing that I felt like, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but like contradicted another thing I heard. It's like, is this about young children, or is this about, because you'd also mentioned like, hey, we have coworkers and stuff, or is this for anybody of any age? And if it is, so now this is my last one, I promise. But if it is for young children, then I, like, okay, then I want to know who the buyer is. I don't think the child's a purchaser, then it is a caretaker. So are you selling it to schools? Are you selling it to parents? Like where does that land? So I know that was 3 questions and I'll repeat them if you.
No, those are amazing questions. So based on your last question, the parents and teachers are the biggest supporters of the young children who are being diagnosed with autism, for example. So they would be
They're your customer?
Yes, as well as education system too. And so being able to provide the service, for example, the avatar, I know you asked about that. This companion tool that can be used as a supplement to different in-school therapeutic modalities. A lot of times now the counseling is done even remotely. And so having that as well within the school system. And so I'd say the customer is both the parent and teachers as well as school systems. And regarding the young adult community, I'd say that they're also one of the biggest consumers for being able to have access to the avatar, which would be able to provide a more relaxed, more of a companion-based kind of feedback where they would be able to receive the support to regulated, dysregulated nervous system.
But the product is an AI avatar. That's the product?
That's a component of the product.
But what is the product? Yeah.
Yes.
Just
so
bring
the
it back to the core.
platform provides access to sensory sensitive products. And so that could be something as simple as a smart fabric or let's say a weighted blanket, or let's say aromatherapy, things that are sensory sensitive in mind and things that can help regulate the nervous system.
So is this like a subscription box where I would get things like a blanket sent to me?
No, it would be a subscription based for the avatar. However, in terms of being able to purchase in the app, it's just purchasing, and we have streamlined to other
So it's
companies.
like a storefront.
Yes.
Okay, so there's an AI avatar, and then there's a store, and the store is a curated collection of things specifically for this audience.
Yes.
And is there anything? So I'm just asking. So AI avatar, storefront, anything else?
That's it.
Okay.
How early are you?
Pre-seed.
Pre-seed. And how long have you been working on this particular project?
In terms of the products and product development, for quite a few years, but in terms of the app development, a few months.
So the reason I ask, so something that's happening, this happened actually 2 weeks ago on the feedback loop. You're very early. And so you just pitched a version of the world that I'm going to give you the tough love feedback of is impossible. Because you have a storefront, you have an AI avatar. You also have this third thing that you said you don't have, but I think I heard you talk about it, which is like almost just a consumer app that might support the person through like what the app reminds you to do, tells you to do, etc. By the way, any of these three things can be compelling, and the way you're approaching this problem is super compelling, but I think this is really challenging for an early stage founder to achieve all of these. Because all of these have different customers, business models, and modalities of interaction with the user. A storefront, for example, relies on being able to find the right merchants and make fees off of, selling that product or getting affiliate fees or whatever it might be. And an avatar has a subscription. I can think of very few apps where I have both a subscription to software and I buy stuff, and both are as important as each other. Usually one is an aside, and it's usually the storefront is an aside to an app. And it feels like you just made the storefront really important in your answer to his question. And that's when I was like, wait, hold on. We just really flipped the script when you started to say the blanket, right? Now, the thing that I think might be going on is you have a lot of these ideas that might support this end user. You might get to all of them, but when you're this early, I think the more important thing to do is pick one, and you can still give the vision of the others, but you got to decide what your workhorse is. Let me give you an example. I think, it sounds like the AI avatar is important to you with how much you've mentioned it. The storefront feels more potentially real tomorrow, but I still think this AI avatar I'm going to pick is, let's say you said that was your workhorse. What you might say is, hey, here's this audience of neurodivergent people. So this person needs to be solved with an AI avatar. Why is an AI avatar interesting? Well, an AI avatar is going to help people as a companion with behaviors that will destimulate them. I'm using terms that I'm not sure are right, but like will help them have a more productive day-to-day and week-to-week. And over the long term, what we envision this product doing is supporting this user in multiple ways. The AI avatar is a companion that anyone can use tomorrow, but the next day we actually expect schools and parents and whatever to also be able to integrate into understanding this as part of their care model. We expect to be able to provide them with recommendations as to what products might help them based on what we see is going on with the user data. As in, when you're talking to our AI avatar, you're logging inside of our app, we can recommend this blanket to you, we can recommend this aromatherapy to you. And the AI avatar has all of this context, and your caretaker has all this context. And suddenly it's this integrated ecosystem that's really interesting. But you can't do all of that at once, mostly for business model reasons, right? Like tomorrow being a storefront and AI avatar is 2 startups. But tomorrow being an AI avatar that one day wants to have a storefront, that's quite achievable.
Thank you.
And I'm just worried that, again, bringing it back to the AI avatar, have you proven that the world wants an AI avatar? Have you proven that an AI avatar is the best solution to serve this audience? And then have you proven that your AI avatar is the best AI avatar to be the most successful. It's like 3 big things you got to prove. I think the hardest thing with an early stage company like this is, I don't know if anybody's asking for an AI avatar. Folks might be saying, hey, I'm struggling and I need a solution. And you might say, I have a solution, but it's a bigger uphill battle when nobody in the world is raising their hand saying, hey, I'm looking for the best AI avatar to solve this problem. So an AI avatar might be the best solution, but you have a bigger uphill battle because no one's asking for that. So you got to introduce a new consumer behavior, and they're going to interact in a different way. They're going to learn in a different way. They're going to get feedback and results in a different way. And these are all things that we're not used to or comfortable with. And so it's like a harder sales cycle to say like, hey, I've got to introduce you to something you didn't ask for, you didn't know you needed. And I'm going to tell you that it's better. And I think that all compounded with like that. Oh, and I also have a store. It's like, okay, you're just hitting me with a lot right now. Like prove one thing first and then do the, maybe the store is the better entry point and it ends up paying for the development of the AI avatar. Maybe the AI avatar is just so great. It learns over time and, the stores are relevant. It just has a pool of merchandise that it knows to recommend to you specifically because it's learned, what's going to be most helpful for you.
Yeah. I agree with that. And just as a wrap up to his point, one of the things that might be happening there, and it's again, the phrase you said that like, I think really resonated with me. When we were talking about like, when I asked you what specific audience, you then mentioned folks with autism might be one of the first audiences. You mentioned simulation. Then you said something. What's a phrase you might have said as to what's happening to those folks that you're trying to solve?
Students and young adults in this population, they are overstimulated. And so the goal is to regulate a dysregulated nervous system and to bring tools and...
So maybe it was just maybe I remembered it when I said the word dysregulated. Maybe that was the word or something like it. And the reason this is so important to me, it gets at what Marty's pointing out, which is like telling us why the thing is going to make the world better. The how is really important in this case. So you saying, look, actually, as someone who's served in this population and seen this, serving dysregulation with these sorts of 3 interventions is really effective. I know you at some point mentioned tapping, which I actually learned about on this stage. And you mentioned a couple other modalities of solution. And you go, well, actually, the problem with accessing these solutions is they have to come from someone who knows about them in a monitored environment, or someone has to have resources or whatever it might be. But through our AI avatar or through our storefront or through our app, we offer these solutions understanding you as a person because you tell us who you are as a person or what's going on with you, and we're able to, in that moment, provide the intervention. And so that begins to solve some of Marty's challenge of like, the person's actually not raising their hand because they can't even understand how to raise their hand, but my experience and these people who I have as advisors and my first test or whatever that you're eventually going to get to proves that my interventions are what they should be raising their hand for. I'm going to teach them to raise their hand for it. So think of even getting more into the weeds as to that user's experience. For the sake of time, though, thank you so much for sharing. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
All right. Marty, we've heard 6 founder pitches. We're going to go to our takeaways.
Okay.
And our favorites. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah. You go first.
My takeaway goes to this whole context of everybody said a lot of things in these pitches. And sometimes that was things that were all interesting, and therefore I was like lost in a maze of interesting things that I didn't know what to grab. Sometimes it was the things that were dangerous, and so they added more questions than they added attraction. And I think the desire of a lot of very early founders who are still working on their story is to tell as much of the surface area of possibility as possible, where I think they actually need to decide to be selective.
Yeah,
and
I think focus.
Exactly.
Like in this, I think especially on the early stage, dominate. I think dominate a niche, and that can be a market, but it also could be like a feature or a product, but like hone in on one thing and do it really well. But it does feel like some of these were really interesting, but because they were boiling the ocean, there was so much going on. I was genuinely curious, wanted to learn more, but it seems unlikely as an early stage founder that they're going to be successful by trying to do all of it.
One, what's funny is I think for some of them, it's not even actually reducing features. It's reducing justifying to investors why those features, what other features are important. So you might build, it's like, it goes to the security one, right? Of like QR codes are dangerous. That's like a fact that is so unnecessary in that moment. And so sometimes it's not just focus in terms of, hey, your startup should be focused on the feature set that's going to help you win. And your story should be focused on the value props that will resonate with an investor or with a customer or with a potential prospective hire in the moment you're telling it to them, in the context in which you're trying to convince them I'm venture backable, or you should join my team, or you should buy my product. And it might actually be selecting the value prop in that moment that's important.
I think an interesting exercise for any of the founders in the room is make a static ad, one that would go on LinkedIn or TikTok, a JPEG, and try to make the most compelling one you can, because just picture it in your head. It's got some big, bold statement that's probably no more than 3 lines. And then it's probably got some 3 bullets, right? It's probably like a green checkbox. And then it's got maybe some closer tagline, and that's your ad. And that's all you get, right? You get some big, bold statement that gets my attention. And then you get these like anywhere between 2 and 4 really interesting, compelling things that are part of that. And then like some fun closer. And like, that's kind of your pitch. And I feel like a lot of these ads, they wanted to do a lot.
So if you go to agree.com, free e-signature for everyone. So you're starting from the like business model value prop. You're like, I'm giving the agreements away for free. Yeah. There's other stuff you might pay for one day. So that's going to get me to read. Then you say, send and sign any agreement with integrated invoicing and payments. Okay. Sending and signing, agreements.
But that's a very frustrating thing to write, because I'm like, hey, it also does, there's collaboration and there's redlining. And hey, we have this really cool AI that scans and parses all of your data, and we extract the input variables, and no more like dragging and dropping. Like, I've got so many cool things that I want to tell you, but I'm not allowed to do any of that. It's e-signature, invoicing, and payments. And that's all it freaking does. I get so mad if that's all you walked away with. There's so many cool things it does, and I think that these founders collectively were just trying to put it, I almost, and again, I don't mean this to sound condescending or even negative, but I think it's just more of a first-time founder, early founder. There's like an insecurity. It's like, you just got to go in with and this is, I think, the hardest thing as a first-time founder, because you know that you have so much going against you, and you know that there's some other founder that's walking in with more experience, and like that pitch before you probably went better or faster. But you've got to go in with this really strong conviction that one bold statement and those 3 things, it's enough. And then when it bought you enough time, then I can get into my cool AI automations, and I can get into how I'm going to do escrow, and I'm going to do invoice factoring, and I'm going to have all this cool collaboration features, but you can't cram it all in at once.
The PNG exercise is a good one. And I think the same thing, can be said if you try to do your landing page as the founder, but just above the fold. Yeah. And for those who don't know the term, that just means everything before you have to scroll. Because a lot of the things that you always want to tell people actually exist on agree.com. They're just as you scroll down the page. But the exercise of that founder to decide, okay, what just goes above the fold? What just goes in the PNG?
Yeah, above the fold, the saying comes from the old newspaper stands, because you just see it before you open the thing. And so what was above the paper fold, that has to be compelling enough to buy the newspaper, to open it, and then to turn to page 6, right? So this thing has to be compelling enough to scroll. I think our general advice here has been the pitch. At the end of this pitch, you don't get a check. At the end of this pitch, the 1-minute pitch, you get 10 more minutes. And then at the end of that, some of these people got 15 minutes, right? So your goal is just to get me to scroll, right? Don't throw everything. You can't put the sports section and the finance section and the business section on the front page of that newspaper.
It's such great advice. That's your takeaway. Do you have any others?
That's the biggest commonalities I saw here. I think almost all of them is funny. It's almost like you found like a cohort. There was only just one founder that felt like it was the inverse of all of those, where it was very early in their thinking. The landlord example, where not a bad idea, not a bad founder, but just fragmented. Felt more like we were having a fun shoot the shit.
A jam.
Yeah, a jam. Whereas the rest, they overthought it. They brought way too much to the table.
Yeah.
Like, just tell me 3 things you do.
Yeah.
Now those 3 things are going to be different for all of you. Some of them you're going to hit the P&L really hard. Some of them you're going to reduce pain points. Some of them you're going to make somebody's life easier. And I do think a few of them, they didn't quite know who their customer was. I heard a lot of talking about, especially with the neurodivergence, on, you could tell it's the patient, but like, if it is that youth, they're not the buyer. Like this is the, who's the customer of Lucky Charms. It's not the 6-year-old that's eating it, right? It's the mom that has to decide to put it in the cart and then pull out the credit card and buy it. So like that's a tough one. The mom doesn't eat the Lucky Charms, but the mom purchases the Lucky Charms.
Totally. No, it's in a business. It gives a lot of ways to your business model thinking when you can be very clear about that.
And I would say, like, for a founder advice, you're so fixated on your startup, what you're building, fundraising for it, making it successful, building it, testing it, all of these things, that when you go into a VC pitch, you sometimes forget that the VC is not as invested as you are, and you're just one of 100 pitches, and it dehumanizes it, and it sounds a little shitty to hear, but that's just the reality of it. And you do have to leave them with something where, like, they remember you, that you stand out, that you sink in with them. Because for some of these, I think the answer to your question, or the point of your question is like, hey, it's not like which one was your favorite, but which one am I going to walk away from and like, they stuck in my head.
Yeah.
I keep noodling on it. And, the reality is I'm going to start thinking like, like what other founder could be building here? What would that look like? And I might start looking for somebody else, right? Not you, like a competitor or somebody else in this market. But your hope is that I don't find it. And I'm like, okay, I got to come back. I got to talk to that founder, because that is part of like the diligence process. I think when someone says they go through due diligence, they're not just they haven't all in on you. They're looking at what other competitive market is out there. They're going to talk to some other investors if anyone in their portfolio company does something like this. And it's not like they're trying to cut you out or steal your idea. They just want to know what the market landscape looks like, and that's their version of like Googling to see if it exists yet.
And it justifies the fact that if they want to make that bet on you, they have to understand what that bet is, which might be, is there competition? Is this a market worth investing in?
Yeah, but I think a lot of this comes back to like, it's an unfortunate reality, but you've got to be in the business of sales. You've got to be a really good salesperson, which means a good storyteller. You've got to put a good narrative forward. And some of you might be the ones that hate networking. You're like, I don't want to do that. But like, it's irrelevant, because you're going to have to get that first customer. So you're going to have to actually be good at sales. You're going to have to recruit that first engineering hire. You're going to have to recruiting is sales. Pitching, getting an investor to come into the party with you, that's sales. So you just got to be like really good at telling that story. And I think that's why like programs like this are really good, because really quick, really fast, you get better at telling the story.
Hopefully, again, it takes them from pitch 1 through 10 to pitch 70 automatically. Yeah. Marty, shout out to you for all the insights and the feedback you've given these founders tonight. Appreciate it. Shout out to all the brave founders who got up on stage and gave the pitch for their vision of the future. Big shout out to the team of the Feedback Loop, both those who are here right now working today and also both before and after. You all rock. Again, we are on YouTube. We're on Spotify. I was about to say Shopify. We'll have merch one day, I'm sure. Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, your favorite podcast platform. Please press subscribe. Your support means everything. We want more founders to see this, more founders to learn from these insights, more founders to get up on that stage. We do this every Tuesday. So if you're around, see you next Tuesday. Have a great night. Thank you.